Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 95. Today we're going to talk about the Viticultural Palace at the 1894 Midwinter Fair held in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. This episode should stay pretty focused and concise without too many asides. Last year I did a series of episodes on the California Wine Association, and this episode could be a prequel to that series. My thesis here is that the fair was the last time in Pre Prohibition California wine that everyone worked together peacefully. For the first few decades of the California wine industry, many were focused on just making it work. Importing, recognizing, and categorizing grapes, planting vineyards, learning how to make wine and prune, and learning how to sell that wine. Information was pretty widely disseminated, and the different groups worked together, more or less at least. There will always be some personality clashes, but even then, everyone was pulling in the same direction. The Midwinter Fair would be the last hurrah. A reminder that I have a Patreon at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast. The link is in the show notes also. If you're enjoying the podcast, any amount to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free and available for everyone is appreciated. It's all run independent and out of pocket. Telling a friend or sharing on social media are great ways to help out too. Here we go. Hail, California, glory to thee, nature's great wonder, noble and free.
You're gazing now on old Tom Moore, a relic of bygone days. 'Tis a bum or two they call me now, but what care I for praise? It's off, says I, in the days gone by, it's off do I repine, for the days of old when we dug out gold in the days of 49.
California had come a long way since the days of 49. Huge influxes of immigrants from around the world seeking gold had arrived, and some left California and went back to where they came. Many stayed, and many more would keep joining them, lured west. M.H. DeYoung had attended the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. It was a hugely successful World's Fair. The book Devil in the White City is a great retelling of it. DeYoung envisioned bringing the fair to California and his longtime home of San Francisco. He got his start as a publisher of an early San Francisco newspaper, the Daily Dramatic Chronicle. You've probably heard of its successor, the San Francisco Chronicle. During his travels east, he also saw Central Park in New York City and the Met Museum's place in the park, amongst the greenery. Putting these ideas together, he envisioned the Midwinter Fair. It would start in January of 1894 and run through the spring, all the way to the 4th of July as a way to show off what California had become in its 45 years of statehood. And where else could you have a fair like this in the winter? That was a stated goal of his, showing off California to the world in the winter. Furthermore, it would give a boost to the sagging local economy. His choice of venues pitted him against horticulturist John McLaren, who also happened to be the well-known superintendent of Golden Gate Park. McLaren didn't even appreciate statues in his park, let alone a fair full of buildings. But he lost the battle, and over 100 buildings would be erected for the fair. Some large, like the Mechanical Arts Building, 200 by 190 feet. It held the driving force of the fair, powering the streetcars, lights, electricity, and displays for other buildings. It sat where the Cal Academy of Sciences does today. Or the even larger Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building, one of the largest in California at the time, 462 by 225 feet. It featured manufactured home goods, technological advances from the University of California, Mills College, Yale, and more. The contents in this giant building span the globe, with 38 countries represented by mechanical works, inventions, and statues. The much smaller Fine Arts Building held works of art inside its Egyptian motif. One of the only buildings to remain after the fair, it would become the first iteration of the DeYoung Museum. To save money and stay on track with the compressed timeline, DeYoung would borrow or repurpose what he could from the Chicago Fair. Some entire exhibits and displays were used. There were other buildings, almost 100, but the one we'll concern ourselves with today is the Viticultural Palace, and what it housed. The California wine industry had come a long way, too. Many producers were in their second generation. Children of the pioneers were involved in the business now. The mission grape and hybrids were much less popular. Zinfandel and other grapes had risen to take their place. The initial wonder that good wine could be produced in California gave way to a real industry that was now dealing with overproduction and stalling prices and consumption. Trade groups and co-ops were on the rise, but at a slow pace. Breaking into the eastern markets remained tough for the California producers, and even when they could sell wines there, the profits were nearly nothing, and French wines remained entrenched. We've discussed the State Board of Viticultural Commissioners many times before, but as a refresher, it consisted of a group of prominent winemen that were brought together in 1880 to promote the viticultural activities of the state. Each of the 7 viticultural areas would have a representative, along with 2 that were at large. These were divided differently than our AVAs today, but there are echoes of those divisions still. Sonoma, Napa, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Joaquin, and El Dorado. Commissioners of each district would be required to report on the conditions of the vineyards, wine and brandy making, and raisin production, along with any special discoveries or techniques, grape varieties, pests, or whatever else may be of interest to others in the industry. They would work with, and just as often against, the University of California in pushing California viticulture forward. In the simplest terms, you could break it down as academics versus business owners, or schooling versus practical men, as the viticultural commissioners sometimes called themselves. But it was never that simple. We'll dive into this in depth at a later time. Anyways, a meeting was called for December 1st, 1893, to be held in San Francisco at the board offices at 101 Sansom Street to discuss a California wine exhibit at the fair. Various ideas for the wine exhibit had been suggested. F.A. Haber, the man in charge of the horticulture exhibit, had 3 designs he thought fitting. Some complete with miniature vineyards, olive, or fruit orchards. Sonoma County was set on building a reproduction of the Russian church at Fort Ross. Residents figured that reproducing the rough-sawn redwood log church of 1812 would only cost about $500. The lumber could potentially be donated even. Other counties were interested in erecting their own buildings. Napa was likely to join Solano, Colusa, and Lake counties in a 90 by 90 building showcasing the agricultural bounty of all 4. About 30 members attended this first meeting. Isaac de Turk, the well-known and well-liked winemaker from Santa Rosa, called the meeting to order and was quickly elected president on the suggestion of P.C. Rossi of the Italian-Swiss colony. De Turk stood in front of his fellow vintners to propose a collective exhibit for the fair, meant to showcase the best of California wines. The agreement was unanimous. The viticultural commissioners had voted to supply a portion of their funding to create a, quote, elaborate and harmonious display at the upcoming fair. In many ways, this would be a coming out party for California wine. And although this wasn't a real World's Fair, it was the closest the young state had come to hosting one of those universal expositions. Perhaps for the wine industry, this would be the end of the innocence, the last gasp before everyone started working against each other. The executive committee of the fair is full of names we've heard before. Isaac de Turk, of course, was president. Clarence Wetmore of Livermore's Cresta Blanca winery was vice president. Winfield Scott would continue his board post as secretary for the exhibit. And Charles Bundschuh would act as treasurer and chairman of the building committee. Quote, and on his shoulders fell much of the work at hand. Fellow committee members included William Venner, F. Corbell, Tiburcio Perot, John Doyle, J. DeBarth Shorb, Charles Carpy, Henry Epstein, F. Behringer, E.C. Bachowski, R.D. Stevens, Hans Kohler, H.W. Crabb, Alan Towle, George West, P.C. Rossi, A. Repsold, and E.C. Pryber. Together, they represented wineries all up and down the state, small and large. Everything at these meetings was formal and followed the Roberts Rules of Order. So motions were presented. How much money should be spent on it? How elaborate should it be? Some thought $20,000 could get it done. Others thought half that, and others thought they might have to do with it halved again. The California wine industry was on shaky ground. People weren't drinking as much wine. Producers found stiff competition with foreign wines. There was an oversupply of grapes and wines, and many were mediocre, or worse. Charles Bundschuh filed a motion that those who exhibited should be disallowed from any competitions held as part of the fair. Charles Kohler seconded, but on popular vote, the measure lost. $2,076 was supplied from the Viticultural Commission, $3,182 more by various other vineyardists. The Italian Swiss Colony, Isaac de Turck, Inglenook, Corbel, and some others each gave $100. J.P. Smith, William Venner, Paul Masson, B.H. Upham, and many more chipped in $50 each. That's the equivalent of almost $2,000 today. A second meeting was held a week later. They had only a little over $5,000 so far, but a proposal had been made. The San Francisco Wine Dealers Association would provide another $1,000 if their displays could be together. They also didn't care about prizes or ribbons. It would be purely commercial in nature for the dealers. Over the series of meetings and design iterations and some horse trading, they would end up contributing $3,500 to the enterprise, mostly to build their centerpiece. The SF merchants had said all along they would be happy with a display along a wall, but they still ended up in the center. Meanwhile, donations still trickled in. George West $50, John Beard $20, F.A. Haber $50, H.W. Crabb $50, Tiburcio Perot $100, Behringer $50, Schramm $50. With this $8,758, Bundschuh and the others would be expected to keep up with the other buildings and represent California wine to the fullest extent. C.J. Wetmore was sent up to Sacramento to have all the funds properly allocated, while Kohler, Schilling, Rossi, and others went to the Midwinter Fair headquarters to secure as much space as they were able for the display. Right now, they were only being offered a small 40 by 60 foot area inside of another building that was pretty hard to access. At the next meeting, a motion was made to reject this small space. It was seconded and held. It was now up to Charles Bundschuh to notify the fair director that the space was insufficient for the California wine industry. The Napa winemen called their own meeting at Turner Hall on December 23rd to discuss their exhibit. Chester Wood and George Olds would be superintendent and helper. Perot, Behringer, Chai, and Ewer would be appointed to gather funds from the other growers and design the exhibit. Napa had more drama than any other county because by the time the exhibit was close to starting in April of 1894, Mr. A. Warren Robinson was superintendent of the exhibition, and nearly every winery participating had signed a petition defending him against charges of incompetence, disinterest, and mismanagement. Behringer, Crabb, Schramm, Brunn, Perot, E.C. Pryber, the Napa Valley Wine Company, and more signed this. The county's other agricultural products made a fine display of fruits, vegetables, and more, even though the fresh produce had to be constantly refreshed. After a thorough search by Bundschuh and others, a new location was found where California Wine's own building could be erected. This would be the Viticultural Pavilion. Wetmore was tasked with getting some more money from Sacramento, while Bundschuh had another new chore. This one proposed and organized by F.A. Haber. Bundschuh was to visit Gustav Niebaum of Inglenook in order to attempt to borrow decorations for the exhibit, ones that Haber called exceedingly desirable. The captain and Haber knew each other well. He had worked at Inglenook until resigning to become superintendent of the exhibit. There were some seemingly well-off individuals who might benefit from the palace but hadn't contributed anything to the funds. This fact did not escape Bundschuh and some of the other men, that the Stanfords, the Hearsts, E.J. Baldwin, and others hadn't given any subscriptions for the fair. The Stanford one hurt Bundschuh the most, as he felt like the winemen had helped the Stanfords get where they were today. He would go so far as to publish an open letter in the Pacific Wine and Spirits Review asking the largest vineyard in the world, again, for a donation. And he later published the reply, which was that there was no reply. Construction of the palace started in February of 1894, after the fair had officially started. There were some setbacks. Water was leaking through the dome. A staircase needed to be built. And they would need to get rid of the ladies' room and an extra office. Construction moved along well after those early hiccups, and by April, it was ready. The viticulture building was smaller than many others, 50 by 75 feet with 26-foot ceilings, and opened up to the larger horticulture building on one side. A stairway connected the two buildings. Repurposed as the door was a large wine oval, engraved with cherubs and California wine across the top. Entering through the door, guests would find themselves surrounded by wine exhibits from 52 manufacturers and wine merchants. The first thing you would see, straight ahead, was the large 10-sided display of the San Francisco Wine Dealers Association, filled with all types of California wines and brandies. They were a looser conglomerate at this moment, but nearly all of them would be working together as the California Wine Association by harvest time. The Napa Valley Wine Company, J. Gunlock & Co., C. Schilling & Co., Arpad Harasthi & Co., B. Dreyfus & Co., Kohler & Froling, Kohler & Van Bergen, Lackman & Jacoby, S. Lackman & Co., and C. Carpy & Co. inhabited this centerpiece, as it was termed. At first they had resisted being in the center, not wanting to draw undue attention, but after a vote, the centerpiece was given to these dealers. The Napa Valley Wine Company was singled out as having a tastefully decorated display with moss and rocks lining the perimeter ground, and the J. Gunlock exhibit is the one you see most in photos. A small wine oval in the center with a cherub on top toasting, some ferns surrounding it, and pillars with wine lining the back wall. On top of the dealer's display was a large plaster globe with statues of Bacchus and Mercury sitting atop it. Bacchus is holding a caduceus and Mercury a goblet of wine. Vines wrap around their legs. Bacchus would soon become the mascot of the CWA, gliding through the Pacific waters that the park jutted up against. J.R. Baker, superintendent of the exhibit, had his office within the pentagonal walls of the SF dealer's centerpiece. The walls were lined with producers, divided with alcoves by region. Working clockwise from the entrance was Sonoma, in the back right corner represented by Corbel and Brothers, Italian Swiss Colony, Isaac de Turk, Fulton Winery Company, Dressel & Co., Fountain Grove, Joshua Chauvet, and others. Next to that, at about 3 o'clock, was the relatively small Contra Costa section, represented by B.H. Upham, Joshua Knopfli, and the Mount Diablo Wine Company. Directly to your right led the Napa section, larger than all the others, with 17 exhibitors participating, including, amongst others, H.W. Crabb, Edge Hill Vineyard Company, Behringer Brothers, Inglenook Vineyard, A. Grimm & Co., A. Brunn & Co., Ewer and Atkinson, G.F. Chevalier & Co., George Schoenwald, Tiburcio Perot, and the list goes on. To your left were the San Francisco wine dealers. These were the smaller wine houses of the city, most of whose names are now lost to time. A. Repsold & Co., Justinian Clare & Co., Wooden and Little, California Wine Growers Union, and a few more. Santa Clara was next, and here you had Paul Masson, William Fenner, Los Gatos and Saratoga Wine Company, C.A. Baldwin, J.C. Merrithew, A.R. Scott, and more. In Alameda County was about 10 o'clock position and represented by J.L. Beard, Josiah Stanford, Leland's brother, Schus and Bond, Cresta Blanca, and a couple others. In the back left of the exhibit was the various exhibitor section. It was represented by only a winemaker or two, but the quality was still high in this section. It was mainly represented by pioneer-type wine growers, William Palmtag of Hollister, Ben Lomond Wine Company of Santa Cruz, H.R. Shell of Red Mountain Winery from Knights Ferry in Stanislaus County, and the giant Central Valley wineries of George West & Sons, the Natoma Vineyard, the Fresno Vineyard, and the Eggers Winery. It's unclear what caused the move, but for a moment in January, it seemed like Deturk, Perot, Epstein, and Corbel would break off and have their own exhibit. Deturk had his giant and high-quality Santa Rosa winery. Perot and his Miravalle estate high up in the mountains. Epstein, business partner of Arpad Rossi and Eclipse Sparkling Wine, and Corbel with their quickly growing champagne, that's in quotes, empire. In the end, they would join the others, but many counties would have their own smaller grape and wine exhibits as part of the agricultural display. Some, like E.H. Rixford, would present their wines at the county exhibits, San Mateo in this case for Rixford. At the Paris Exposition 5 years earlier, the California wine exhibitors were spread out and segregated from each other, but this layout kept everyone close by and presented California wine as a whole. Walking out the main exhibit would take guests to the Wines Tube. This should serve as a reminder how German in character the early California wine industry was. The Wines Tube was decorated with stained glass and 2 large wine barrels with various inscriptions in German and English. Welcome the coming guest. The wine will do the rest. Let us have wine, mirth, and laughter. Sermons and soda water the day after. Good company, good wine, good welcome, can make good people. The opening line from the episode was another one. Tables and chairs were also provided for anyone to sample wines. Guests were encouraged to do it. A 25-foot-tall wine bottle was covered with 90 cases of wine as further decoration. The Pacific Wine Company, Secondo Guasti, the Cucamonga Wine Company, Los Amigos, and Sierra Madre contributed bottles for the tower. This was a bit of a theme. The walnut growers had an elephant made from walnuts, and the prune growers had a knight on horseback with a lance and shield made from the dried French plums. And the Husband brothers contributed a mini 2.5-gallon barrel of walnut and maple that wowed fairgoers with its workmanship. April 7 was the formal opening day of the Viticultural Palace. Guests were seated with sparkling wine close at hand while speeches were given after a short orchestral overture. Bunchu stood and spoke first. May it mark the beginning of a new era, and may the dawn of prosperity and better times for our vineyardists radiate from its picturesque dome. He finally turned over the building to its noble purpose. Deturk spoke next. It affords me great pleasure on the part of the executive committee of the viticultural exhibitors to take from the building committee this beautiful structure, which is such a credit to viticulturists and at the same time such a credit to the exposition. I trust that this will not only mark a new era in viticulture in California, but that it will mark a season of such harmony as we have not recently experienced. I take great pleasure in now turning the building over to the Executive Committee of the Midwinter Exposition, for whom I believe Director General de Young will speak on this occasion. De Young indeed followed up. Yet I cannot escape a feeling of pride, which I'm sure you must share in what we see here today. Pride in our viticulturists who've had the energy and the power to make such a beautiful viticultural display in the face of the depression which has existed in that line of business. I look upon viticulture as the principal, or one of the principal interests of our state. In all my public acts, I have uniformly been a friend of viticulture and the viticulturists. I have a strong belief in the future and lasting success of our state and the development of this great industry. The American people, I'm proud to say, are fast becoming educated to the fact that good wines can be produced in our own country. A few years ago, one could not get a glass of California wine at an American hotel or restaurant. But now, it is being placed on bills of fare and is fast becoming popular. This is a small matter, perhaps, but it shows the advancements California wines are making. He further defended the California wine industry against the injurious French tariffs that we've discussed before. The duty on wines was 50 cents per gallon, but the devil lay in the details. In no circumstances could the duty be larger than the invoiced price for the wine. Imported wines could be invoiced as low as 8 cents per gallon, with another 8 cents added as a tariff, allowing wines from France to be imported for as low as 16 cents per gallon. Sometimes these bottles of French wines could be imported for the cost of empty glass by the California wineries. DeYoung gained the respect of all the winemakers present by rallying against the Wilson bill that was causing much of this issue. F.A. Haber also provided some words, many of them in praise of Kate Field, the subject of episode 44 of the podcast. I propose a name dear to every wine grower and dealer in the United States, a woman who has done more than any other for the cause of temperance and breaking down the barriers of ignorance in regard to our great interest, who has devoted her time in the columns of her journal, Kate Fields, Washington, in preaching the gospel of the grape. No one deserves more thanks, and we here evince our deep appreciation of her great services in saying, all honor to Kate Field. A couple more speeches were given before Bundschuh gave a toast to the occasion and invited everyone to help themselves to wines of their choice and enjoy the food spread out in front of them. Over 2 million would attend the fair, over 4 times more than the Mechanics' Institute fairs from the early days. And thousands passed through the Viticultural Pavilion to sample the up-and-coming California wines. J.R. Baker figured it was about 60,000 total, or 600 per day. Over 4,000 sample bottles were used during the course of the fair in the tasting room, and another 21 cases were distributed for toasts, special occasions, presentations, and other official functions. Special attention was paid to getting the wines in front of Easterners and foreigners so they might take their experiences with California wines back home with them. Of course, any fair has wine judging, and the Midwinter Fair was no exception. Arpad wrote up instructions for the judges and the judging categories. Red wines, white wines, sweet red wines, sweet white wines, sparkling wines natural process, sparkling wines carbonated process, and brandies. Each was further divided into categories by regional style or sweetness or wine styles that they mimicked. Serving temperatures for each style of wine were noted, and glassware should be identical for every wine in a category. Wines were all judged blind, wrapped in paper with all identifying marks removed so the maker would only be known after the judging. Quote, the points guiding the jurors to reach conclusions of comparative merit will be the following. 1. Brightness of the wine. 2. Beauty of color or shades of color. 3. Perfection of bouquet. 4. Purity and delicacy of taste. 5. Quality of body. 6. Quality of savor. 7. Proper alcoholic strength. 8. Harmonious perfection of the whole. In trial for sparkling wines, the 2 following additional points must be considered. 9. Vivacity of sparkle. 10. Duration of sparkle. Each of these, if perfect, would be given 100. If not, a so much less numerical evaluation as the juror may indicate. Afterwards, an average is to be struck of the sum total, which divided by 8 for still wines and 10 for champagnes, will stand as the credit of the wine in question. Unquote. Some of the winning wines were by Arpad the Paul Masson, Cresta Blanca, Isaac de Turk, J.L. Beer, Dressel & Co., Grimm & Co., George West, Jacob Schramm, Behringer Brothers, Ben Lomond, H.W. Crabb, Vanner, Fountain Grove, Palmtag, Italian Swiss Colony, Eggers, and more. Many of those names we heard earlier in the episode, of course. 84 dry white wines were entered, with 12 receiving first-class diplomas and 5 second-class. Of the 73 dry red wines, the count was 12 and 6. Sweet wines were tough, and out of 36 entries, only 2 received first-class and 3 second-class. Sparkling was another story. Out of the 6 entries, 3 were first-classed and 2 were second-classed. Once the fair got underway, there was little wine-related drama, except for a funny moment with the Italian wine presentation. Foreign bottled wines at the fair remained under bond, and so only U.S. wines, really California wines, could be sold at the fair. Customs officials noticed the Italian stock of wines dwindling quickly, though. The missing wines were traced back to the Canadian booth. Inside, after the inspectors busted down the door, they found the Canadian commissioner and another man with 15 bottles strewn around them and so drunk they could barely walk. One man draped a British flag over himself and yelled he was a foreign citizen and official and couldn't be detained. But they were detained, and there's no info on the aftermath of this situation, unfortunately. But a man that stole a single bottle from the wine pyramid at the Santa Clara Valley exhibit got 10 days. It's interesting that they stole from the Italian exhibit, since it was said to have a soda fountain-style wine dispenser where you deposited a nickel and received a glass of wine. The fair would work against them in ways that threatened to undermine the work of the industry in an important way. Charles Bowen of Wetmore Bowen would fight back. Bowen discovered that no quality tests would be given to wines sold by the concessionaires. Of course, these would be California wines, and just about the cheapest would do for the sellers. One was ready to purchase wines in bottle for 10 cents a bottle. Another was actively seeking the cheapest wines they could find. It would be even better if a wine firm paid them to sell their wines. Bowen fought for the wines of the exhibitors to be poured and sold throughout the fair. Quote, "One poor glass of wine served in the restaurants of the Midwinter Fair will create more of an impression than all the joint or individual exhibits there." Unquote. Surprisingly, the editor of the Napa Register couldn't or wouldn't allow himself to see how this might be accomplished, dismissing Wetmore or any thoughts that restaurants serving food and wine could have any quality control. The official paper of the fair noted that with California wine selling for only 15 cents a glass, there was no excuse for anyone to be sober. A few interesting conversations were had between different countries. Some of the Spanish commissioners visited the Alameda County booth with designs on blending Spanish wines with Alameda County wines. The Wetmore brothers, J.L. Beard, the Concannon Winery, and others met with the representatives. Livermore representatives had little thought to blending their wines with Spanish, unless it was sherry. They realized some sherry stock from Spain could give their sherry-type wines a great boost. Mexico, and more specifically the Mexican Central Railway Company, was interested in bringing more California wines into the country. Eastern and Central wine men also became much better acquainted with these wines of the Pacific Slope. The agent of a large steamship company, newspaper publishers, and New York club owners came away with much more favorable opinions of California wines. The steamships and clubs vowing to stock the wines and even making purchases from Paul Masson, Jacob Schramm, and others. Isaac de Turk did his best to show off California charms to visitors. A man who does nothing by halves, he was called by the Pacific Wine and Spirits Review. 200 foreign commissioners from the fair joined him on a railroad trip to Guerneville to show off the redwoods. Corbel supplied wine and food for the trip up. On the return trip, de Turk called for the train to stop at his winery in Santa Rosa, where hundreds of bottles of all 7 types of wine he produced were set out. A full Sonoma spread was set out of local olives and cheeses and bouquets of flowers throughout. Quote, "The lunch was greatly enjoyed by every member of the party, many of whom were experts in vintage matters. They pronounced the wine superior and passed many compliments on it and the genial and thoughtful host who had provided so bountifully for their comfort. As they departed, 3 cheers, hearty ones they were too, were given for Mr. de Turk." Unquote. Before the fair ended, the wine men got together for a dinner. Looking back, it was the calm before the storm. Bunchu, Pryber, Epstein, Rossi, Renner, Bendel, Wetmore, Carpy, Jacoby, Kohler, Gunlock, Harosty, Lockman, and more, most with their wives, gathered around tables set into a T in the wine tasting room, the Weinstube. They dined on oysters, shrimp salad, striped bass with anchovy sauce, sweetbreads, lamb chops, greens, asparagus, spring hens, cheese, cakes, coffee, and fruits. Toasts and speeches to the fair's success were given. For de Young, it was his 89th speech of the fair. Right there, it was planned to take advantage of some of the decorations of the palace for future fairs. Haber gave a toast to the viticultural past, present, and future. Quote, "No one need to be ashamed of the past. The present is uncertain. The future will be bright." Unquote. Towards the end of the exhibit, the Viticultural Commission lost one of its original members, R.B. Blowers of the Yolo Hills area. Never a wine man, but along with B.N. Bugbee, a pioneer raisin man and one of the first to have large-scale vineyards. He's appeared in a handful of historical episodes. Although forgotten mostly now, he was an important man at the dawn of California viticulture, especially in Yolo and raisin production. He'll appear more down the line. Keeping the wine theme going, a sculpture by Gustave Doré that still stands in front of the De Young Museum was purchased for the fair. They had purchased it from the Chicago World's Fair, and it was one of the pieces that was to be recycled for the Midwinter Fair. La Poème de la Vigne, an 11-foot-tall sculpture depicting the trials of winemaking. Along the bottom, cherub babies protect the vines from insects, rats, snails, and other pests. As the globe of the 3-ton sculpture widens, a bacchanalia begins, hosted by Dionysus, with the party moving up to the top of the sculpture, showing the more intoxicating sides of wine. A cider press sculpture, often mistaken as a wine press, sits nearby. It was also shown at the fair by American artist Thomas Shields Clark. As the fair wound down, Haber resigned, having led the exhibit faithfully but needing to find a new job. He landed at the New York Life Insurance Company. He'll also appear in a later episode. Somewhat miraculously, the exhibit didn't run over, and they even had some money in the bank at the end, about $263, equal to about $10,000 in 2025 money. Decorating had overages, and Mr. E.A. Otto had gracefully waived much of the cost, allowing the project to stay within budget. Everything was sold afterwards. Many dealers purchased the decorations, and even the building was sold. Distributions for the money left over were voted on. $63.64 would go to J.R. Baker for his superintendent work. $100 was given to Mr. Otto to partially pay back some of the discount he provided. The last $100 was to go towards photos of the exhibit to be distributed to members of the committee as keepsakes. With that, all the money from the special committee was accounted for, and the committee was adjourned. In tallying up these numbers, Bunchu would end his statement, quote, "This comparatively limited effort in the direction of consolidation and mutual support has demonstrated beyond doubt that concert of action and fairness of purpose must accomplish beneficial results. Let's hope that all future attempts to benefit or resuscitate viticulture in California will be carried out on similar principles of mutual harmony and good fellowship." Unquote. Of course, as we've seen, it would be anything but, as consolidation fueled by low prices, softening demand, and overproduction soon took over the industry, and a battle waged on all sides in the form of the wine wars. Little harmony would exist in California wine from this point all the way to Prohibition. If you want to hear what happened next, I'd suggest jumping to episode 56 for the beginning of the California Wine Association. Too much you can touch, but never enough if it be the stuff. Here amidst bright eyes and faces, here sorrow cannot reach. Hail California, glory to thee, nature's great wonder, noble and free.
Of all the comrades that I've had, there's none that's left to boast. And I'm left alone in my misery, like some poor wandering ghost. And as I pass from town to town, they call me the rambling sign. Since the days of old when we dug out the gold, in the days of 49.
Before we totally finish, I do need to give some quick words about this fair in general. It was racist and dangerous in the ways that only the late 1800s was capable of. Germans dressed as Japanese pulling rickshaws in the tea garden. A replica, that's in quote, African village, also borrowed from the Chicago Fair. The individuals had been recruited by a French ivory trader, and 4 of the 57 died during the fair. An Inuit village with members living in papier-mâché igloos, and reproductions of Cairo with Turkish and Algerian street hawkers, and the dancer Little Egypt were some of the other attractions at the fair. Prototype roller coasters, a replica-ish version of the Ferris wheel, a Dante's Inferno ride where you could get poked by men in devil costumes with pitchforks, and a room made of all animal fur, ceiling, walls, tables, chairs, all fur of different mammals. It even had a mining camp, the gold rush already whitewashed and romanticized as a bygone era, less than 50 years after it had started. McLaren had his own enemy, Bonnet's Tower. About a third of the size of the Eiffel Tower, with electric lights that it was said would let you read a newspaper in the dark at 3rd and Market. He felt it was ruining the park more than any other attraction and had it knocked down as soon as possible using explosives so that it couldn't be rebuilt. Thanks for listening today. Although not the most well-known event in California wine history, I thought it an important one to cover. The notices of awards are impossible to escape for the next couple years of periodicals after the fair, and many used the awards as a selling point until the turn of the century. I find it interesting that in hindsight you can see it all forming and coalescing, and that the industry would never be the same. Please follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at IndieWinePodcast. Feel free to email IndieWinePodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love if you told a friend or wine lover about it and help spread the word. Rating, reviewing, or donating at patreon.com/IndieWinePodcast helps a lot too. There's also Venmo for one-time donations if you don't want another subscription. I understand that. It all goes to offsetting podcast expenses, keeps it ad-free, available for everyone, and allows for more episodes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.